welcome everybody, and thanks for joining today our FinPro webinar. It's great to see so many people online, and it was great to see some of you at least at the conference last week. Really grateful and glad to be able to put this on today on a really important topic. I might just start by acknowledging that where I am is on Yarra Ranges and just down the road, Tangarang country. I'd just like to acknowledge and extend my appreciation for the Yarra Ranges people who are the traditional owners of the land that I'm zooming through to you from today, and obviously many other lands that you're all probably coming from today as well. I'd just like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. First and most important thing to say when we do these FinPro webinars is to say thank you to our presenters for today. This is a really important topic around disaster recovery funding arrangements. I've certainly become a little bit more aware of what DRFA is, and it just rolls off the tongue now, but there's still some people in council that I need to stop and explain my acronym for. So we're here to learn a little bit more about that today. I do want to recognise that for some councils and certainly some of my family of my staff here in Bendigo, this is a very present, and there's still a actual recovery and some pretty hard stuff going on. So I guess, as we said last week at the conference, our first thought is to support, help, check with your neighbouring council for those day-to-day things. FinPro is a good collegiate group for that. And so if you are struggling, make sure you do reach out either via Gab, myself, any one of those neighbouring councils for those sorts of things. But very quickly after the initial day-to-day things, certainly for Bendigo, we had probably a weekend significant event. We're now turning into trying to understand what that means for categories A, B, C, and D, and all sorts of things that we're going to have some speakers about today. So thoughts with Echuca, then Swan Hill, and as that water moves through at the moment for some of those things, but also obviously now we're switching to how we sort of prepare for that. So thanks to our presenters, we have today on the line Alison Southwell, I met last week, who's the Manager of Financial Services, but our primary presenter today is Penny Thomas, who's a finance business partner, recovery accountant. And we welcome and thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you online, and I'll hand over to you in a sec to get going. I will just make a note, because we've had a few more people come in. If you can, stay on mute, just in case the dog or whatever it is makes a bit of noise in the background. That can sometimes distract, so just keep yourself on mute if possible. And we have had some questions beforehand. A number of those will be covered, but you're welcome to pop them in the chat all the way through, and we might pick them up as we go. Penny and I can manage that as we go along. Or we will cover it at the end. As you know, these sessions are always better if there's a little bit of interaction and a little bit of question as we go along or later. But some of those questions that were submitted beforehand, thank you for those. Some of them are actually covered in some of the things that Penny's going to run through today. I think that's enough as an intro from me. Welcome again, everybody. And Penny, I might hand over to you to talk through and let us know a little bit more about where you guys are at and have been at, and going for disaster recovery funding arrangements. Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan. Can everybody hear me? Excellent. Well, welcome to this session this morning. This, fortunately or unfortunately, has been my life for the last 15 months. The disaster recovery funding arrangements. I was brought into council in July last year following the June 2021 storms, which had a huge impact at Yarra Ranges. And we pretty much dealt with all of the claims for that now. We're still doing some asset reconstruction, but most of it's done. And then, of course, we have the recent floods, which have just mean we start all over again, which is such fun. Hang on, why are we not moving? Why is it not moving? There we go. So just a few of the things that I'm going to run through today. An introduction to DRFA. I know some of you will be intimately across this, just as I am. For those of you who aren't, I'll give you a quick introduction. I'll not cover too much of what's already available on the website. I'm going to focus mostly on the last bit, tips and tricks, what worked for us. We made it all up as we went along, basically. And what worked, we kept going. And if it didn't work, we changed it and just kept trying things until we worked it out. So the disaster recovery funding arrangements, or as we love to call it, DRFA, and does roll off the tongue now quite easily. It's a cost sharing arrangement between the state, federal and local governments. It relieves some of the burden of the financial burden after a natural disaster. It's not intended to pay for the whole thing. They like to share the pain, which is delightful of them. There's 4 categories of funding. Category A and B are the most common sources. Category A is dealing with emergency assistance to individuals, and Category B is repair of damaged essential public assets. One of the first things we learnt was a tree is not an essential public asset, so don't show me photos of trees. Yeah, essential public assets for the most part is roads. Category C and D require the state to seek Prime Minister approval prior to any expenditure occurring. We didn't actually get any C and D funding as a result of June 2021, so I really can't tell you very much about that. I will focus this on Category A and B. So Category A is emergency assistance for individuals. There's a great long list there of all of the things that are covered. For us, we had emergency accommodation for people who had to be evacuated. We had relief and recovery centres. We ran about half a dozen shower and power sites. As you might know, there was a lot of power loss up in the Yarra Ranges for quite a long period of time. So we set up En-suites on call is what the company that we used, and they brought in their bathrooms, and we had fires going, and we were providing hot meals for people. They could come in, have a shower, charge their devices, and probably more importantly, chat with other people who were in the same situation. So that was a big cost for us. Excuse me, talking of dogs. Got it.
All good, Penny, you're doing well. Yeah.
Someone's just walked past the window. How dare they? We did a lot of green waste was a very significant portion after the storms in June 2021. In particular, this disaster in June 2021 was very much a wind event. A lot of trees came down. We've got videos of it looks like matchsticks with the trees that came down in that event, after that event. So very different to a flood event, obviously. And there was a lot of removing trees, either on houses or leaning towards houses, also leaning towards or on driveways, access to properties. All of that is covered by Category A. I won't go through the full list, you can read it there. Category B was a much larger financial cost for us. As I said, an essential public asset, mostly roads, but only if they're owned by council. We got caught with a lot of those where we did work on Vic Roads, owned roads, and we couldn't claim those. We eventually decided they did some work on our roads, we did some work on their roads. We just net it off and just call it a nil-all draw. Footpaths beside roads were covered, although there was some toing and froing about that initially. The nature strip beside the road is covered, bridges, but the nature strip, because a lot of Yarra Ranges is semi-rural, sometimes the nature strip is 10 metres wide. Well, they're not going to cover all of that because it doesn't affect, all of it doesn't affect the road. So there's some negotiation involved there. We did do immediate reconstruction for one road that just got completely washed away. That was done very early on in June last year. And the rest of it was, unfortunately, we did have and still do have a lot of unsealed roads, and they were severely affected with the trees coming down, and then the equipment that was used to remove the trees then damaged the road further. We did have some flooding, not a lot, but there was some flooding up there as well, which affected the roads. So category C and D, as I said, we didn't get a lot of love out of these, unfortunately. So category C is a community recovery package that's intended to support, and I'm reading this off here because I don't know anything about it. Yeah, recovery of communities. We could have used this a lot. This would have been very helpful. Anyway, both of them require upfront approval before you spend the money, whereas categories A and B, you apply for the money after you've spent the funds. So a lot easier in some ways because you're off doing things before you know what's going to happen. I'll skip over that one. As I said, most of the council's claims will be under category A and B. We lodged 46 claims for June 2021 to a total of 10.3 million. There's still about 15 of those that have not been assessed, which makes it fun when they ask questions about them and the claim was done 6 or 8 months ago and you've got to remind yourself what was in it. So there's time limits for each of the activities. Generally, they say 3 months from the date of the disaster. As you can imagine, in June 2021, we were pretty much in lockdown for the whole of the 3 months. So there wasn't a lot of activity that could go on in some areas. We ended up extending the category A activity out to 12 months. And also the category B activity went out to, I think it was 11 months. So yeah, 3 months is I think it's a suggestion. You do have to apply for extensions, but we had a great relationship with both EMV and our assessor, and we just negotiated those extensions, filled in the appropriate forms, and there wasn't too much of a difficulty with those. And just one other thing, if you've got works that are covered by insurance, then you can't claim those, which is fairly obvious, really. You need the money once, not twice, although that would be good. There is a list of ineligible items as long as your arm on the website. I've just got a few of them here. One of the ones which caught us very early on was fire trails. That affected. Apparently, it's not an essential public asset. There's some discussion about that, but it's specifically excluded. So, yeah, it was one of the major focuses early on was opening up fire trails, and we couldn't claim any of those costs. So that was interesting. Any environmental assets, rivers, beaches, waterways, natural vegetation, not an essential public asset, as I said. Trees are not an asset, apparently. You'll excuse me if I'm a little cynical. It's been a long year. And anything to do with sporting facilities, recreation, walking trails, fences, any other playgrounds, those sorts of things, none of that is covered, which is a bit sad because we spent a lot of money on those, and I'm sure everybody would. And some more things that are not covered. Yeah, staff counselling, we had a lot of that and it wasn't covered. Pedestrian facilities that aren't near roads are not covered. Yeah, there's a list as long as your arm. This isn't even everything, unfortunately. So it's all available on the EMV website, which I'm sure you've all seen. And if you haven't, I wish you the best of luck. It's not the most logical website as far as I'm concerned, but all the information is there. The other thing is betterment works is something that's not funded under category B. So you can put the road back to the state it was in before, but if you'd like to prevent damage from happening again and make the road better, unfortunately, they won't cover that. And we did do some betterment works that weren't covered. It just makes sense. If you're going to rebuild a drain, let's rebuild it in a way that it's not going to get washed away again. I mean, that's fairly obvious, but they won't pay for that. They'll only pay for taking it up to the standard that it was before. So there's the link there to the Victorian Government guidelines. Just some general ideas. One of the things we were very aware of from the first day was that we will be audited, possibly by state and federal governments. So the paper trail needs to be exceptional, and it could be 3 years down the track when that happens. So it needs to be robust and available. You know, who knows who will be in council at that time, who needs to be able to find the information to answer any questions the auditors have. Another thing that we got caught with early on was you must follow your own procurement policies when you're doing the work. And that took a little while to get through to some people, as it does when they're in the rush of the immediate works. And that will be audited as well, as whether you are following your own procurement policies. There are other sources of funding, which I'm sure everybody's interested in. We were very fortunate to access the Council Support Fund for the funding of our Recovery Directorate, which I'll go through in a moment. Let me tell you, the access of that to that funding is a hell of a lot easier than DRFA. I will just pause there. Does anybody have any questions? I've run through that pretty quickly because I expect a lot of people will already know it. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them now.
We don't have too many in the chat right now, Penny. I'm just checking nobody's got their hand up or unmuting and jumping in, but I might just kick off on when you talk about betterment and the road and it coming back to a certain condition. Certainly there's quite a few gravel roads that are at varying conditions at the City of Greater Bendigo. We're going to put it back maybe slightly better, so it goes from a 7 to a 9 or something. Do they apportion, or do they just say they're not going to? And how do you? Well, yeah, I'd be engineering, but I just want to make sure we're capturing what we need to capture, if that makes sense for that process.
Yeah, it's not an exact science, obviously. It's, you know, we're pretty much working with the assessor. He makes an assessment of, you know, if you spent $10,000 on the road. He'll say, well, you know, I think you probably could have spent half of that to put it back where it was, and the other half is betterment. So it's a bit of a negotiation. I sort of always went back with, oh no, I think it should be 75, and then we'd end up somewhere in the middle, just because that seemed to work.
Right, so there's a level of negotiation that you've got to be ready to kind of engage in. And yes, as a finance person, Penny, you'd say you were involved in that. It wasn't just off with the engineering group, if you like, to, you know, you were in the middle of that a little bit as well, is what I guess I'm picking up there, which would be quite different for, say, roads to recovery or other things that people might have been involved in. You send it off to the eng team and it comes back, kind of thing. So just, yeah, it's a good point. Thanks.
There was someone with their hand up, I think.
Good one. I think we do have one there
from Gayatri here from the City of Greater Geelong. Thanks, Penny. That's really good to sort of share, because it's not only reinforcing that what we're doing is what you're doing. So that's, you know, and as well as giving us more information as well. But one of my questions is, did you have to take, how did you deal with waste disposal when you took it to the landfill? What were you able to claim? Did you have to sort of, set up a new tracking system, or how, was there anything you had to do for that? Just curious, because we had a similar challenge in a previous storm, so hence the question.
We had a very interesting time with waste. As you can imagine, with the number of trees that went down, there was a lot of green waste, and there basically was nowhere set up in Victoria that could take the amount of waste that was generated from the storm. We set up a number of sites to process that green waste, so mulchers, people with chainsaws, big, huge earth-moving equipment to move things around. And what we found was that the guidelines on category B and A don't actually cover that. They sort of hadn't thought about that when they put it together. So they had to make up something. The other thing they found, and what we found, is when we first set those up, they were basically just, you know, the local footy oval. Just dump all your stuff there and we'll deal with it later. But there was no one recording who was bringing the material in, how much there was, or where it came from. So when the assessors tried to then say, well, what essential public asset was affected that has caused that waste, we couldn't get that link. And ideally, we would have, and it was an idea that was brought up at the time and just knocked on the head because it was going to cost too much, as these things often do. You really needed to have someone posted at every site recording every load that came in, which is an extraordinary undertaking, obviously, in the first months after a storm. And we had 4 sites set up, some that were just holding the material ready to go to the processing site and some that were processing. We created a lot of firewood that we gave out to residents, a lot of mulch. Unfortunately, we created so much mulch, pretty much the whole of Victoria didn't have enough requirement for mulch to cover what we generated. And we've got mulch ready to go for our council sites for about the next 10 years, I think, because we generated so much. So yes, it's a very meticulous record keeping process that's required. They came up with a quick and dirty method, really, I would call it, that kind of worked, because we couldn't go back and create records that we didn't have. They just said, all right, this particular site is likely to have picked up green waste from this area. These are the roads in that area where you cleared trees from. Therefore, this is the list of essential public assets that are related. And then how much do we think was council roads? How much do we think was Vic Roads roads? How much do we think was Parks Victoria using the sites? And we just had to make some assessments and came up with, I think we ended up getting about 75% of those costs. And it cost us $2.5 million to dispose of that green waste. So yeah, but at least it was something.
Thanks, Penny. That's great. We might go, because I'm trying to preference the people with hands up that can jump in. I think I can see a hands up from Caroline next.
Hi, how you going? I was just looking at the tips and tricks, the FTE funded by DRFA. Can we, I guess, is this just for this one disaster? Because we're 3 weeks in, we've closed our ERC, we've had our staff like do the emergency centre. Can we get a role in our council that is always part, you know, for natural disasters and have them continue to fund that? Or is it, per disaster?
Yeah, it is per disaster, unfortunately. We had, there were 2 category B roles, and I'm going to go into this in just a second. You've jumped ahead on me. So one who was involved in the roads work and one who was involved in the tree work. So, and they were funded, the tree person was funded for 6 months and the roads person for 12. But yeah, it's just a period of time after the disaster. There's not a permanent funding for that, unfortunately.
Thank you, Penny. We might go to the chat questions if that's okay, to keep going on questions for a bit. So I've got one there from Claire Barnes, and I imagine people can click the little chat button depending on which browser version and etc. you're on, but I'll read it out. They have a large shared path network. Was this covered? What does a footpath shared path move from a transporter? So like, when does that changeover happen to a walking trail? Because I think you may have noted some of the ineligibility of like just the, you know, a path running through a rec oval, I imagine is ineligible, but I think that's the point of the question. Where does that line stop if it's on the side of a road?
Yeah, the line beside the road is again a negotiation. It needs to be reasonably close to the road. Like if it's in a residential area and you've got the nature strip and then the footpath, that's pretty much going to be part of the essential public asset. But as you say, if it's going through a park, if it's going around an oval, if it's Car parks was another one we didn't really notice was not eligible, but you know, that's just one of the finer things that you come up with. So, and it is a negotiation. We spend a lot of time using the Street View on Google Maps to really get a picture of what that road looked like. Unfortunately, they didn't take pictures just before the storm, sadly, which would have helped us, but some of them they did, so that was very helpful. But it also gives you a picture of, you know, how wide is the nature strip, how far away from the road is the path, because it is the road itself that is the essential public asset, so it needs to be impacted for it to be eligible.
Thanks, Penny. We'll just keep coming down the list. Is a council-owned building eligible for Cat B? Definitions, road infrastructure. My read is that it's a council-owned building, maybe insurance, but either way, it's not
correct.
Covered,
that is
generally.
correct. Yes.
Yeah. And then there's a little bit of an extra one there. Is the initial inspection and asset impairment revaluation an eligible cost to claim?
Asset impairment, no, definitely not.
Thank you. And then one from Travis, and it was good to see you last week, Travis, at the conference. Did the council take photos of areas impacted by the natural disaster pre and post cleanup to support your claims?
Yes, there was a lot of photos obviously taken, and we had to educate people as to what the photo needed to show. We initially got a lot of photos of trees, very helpful, except not. It really needed to show the horizon. It needed to show where is the road in relation to the tree, and how is the road impacted by the tree. We had a lot of leaning trees after the storm, which had to be removed because they were going to fall on the road. Yeah, it's quite an education process for the contractors to know that that's what they needed to do, and the before and after photos that they take. So they, I mean, and this must be hard when you're on site and the residents are waiting for you to clear something. Hang on, I've just got to take some photos. You know, that must go down really well.
Yeah.
Yeah, trying to take it from the same angle so you can actually see what was done. That's a bit tricky sometimes, but yeah, they did their best. And there's a bit of like in the first few weeks after the storm, the assessor was a bit more lenient with that because, you know, obviously we're just sending people out, just open the road, just get that tree off people's driveways so they can get in and out of their house. But if there were no photos, they basically wouldn't accept it. But if we could come up with something, we used our customer request system a lot, where people had called in and said, the trees are hanging over my house, can you come in and remove it because I'm scared, you know? And if it said that, they would accept that that was an eligible cost because quite obviously.
That's another source I hadn't thought of. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Penny. We might let you keep going because I reckon if we keep going with questions, we might just finish your entire anything else you've got to say. So we'll let you keep going and then we'll come back to questions. But please, everyone, keep going in the chat if you've got other things you want to raise, and we'll come back to them. Thanks, Penny.
Yep. So as a result of the June storm in 2021, a new directorate was created in council. It absolutely dedicated to the storm recovery and repairs and all the work that needed to be done. So there were 35 people recruited. I was one of those people recruited at that time from outside council. Most of the people were seconded from their business as usual roles from within council. Only 6 of those were funded through DRFA, and I've got a org chart to show you in just a moment. And the rest were funded through the Council Recovery Fund, which we were very fortunate. We've been very fortunate to get a lot of support from that over the last, 15 months. And that is a lot easier to get than the DRFA funding, I can tell you. Basically, the Council Recovery Fund, all that required was a position title and when they were going to start, when they were going to finish, and how much it was going to cost. Whereas with DRFA, you need detailed position descriptions, and they need to be approved before you employ the people, which is, it did take us a long time to get to the point where we could do that. But yeah, the Council Recovery Fund was a lot easier, which was helpful, because as you can see, and I'm sorry this is such a busy slide, but there's 35 people there. So can you see my mouse if I'm pointing?
Yeah, no, we can actually. Yeah,
yep.
But
okay. So we had a director who reported directly to the CEO of council, and she had 3 people directly reporting to her, and also 2 secretariat people. And so there's the recovery support, which is where the finance is, and then the built and natural environment, which is where trees and roads sit, and then the community recovery. So as you can see, it's quite complicated. The 2 Cat B funded roles is the Public Infrastructure Rehabilitation Officer and the Tree Cleanup Coordinator. And then over on the, if I just move that out of the way, yeah, go away. The Cat A roles were Recovery Centre Coordinator and Support Officers. And one of the things those Category A people did towards the end of their time was they actually went around and door knocked for people that we had records of being severely affected. We knocked on their door and said, how are you going? What do you need? Are you getting what you need? Can we link you in with some other services that would help you? So, and that was very well received. People were so grateful to have council interested. It's not always possible to do that, obviously. And one of the reasons it was quite late in the piece that was done was we were in COVID lockdown for so much of the recovery time, which was just added such fun to the whole thing. I might ask for any questions on this recovery structure just while it's up on the screen.
Thanks, Penny. I might go to, unless I've got another, I don't think we're getting hands up, but I've got just some other ones that are kind of position related first, perhaps. But one says here, thank you, Deanne. With the internally filled disaster roles, did they need to be backfilled to be eligible for the funding?
No, they didn't need to be backfilled. And
these were new positions, though, weren't they?
Yes, they were. They were new positions. It was work that wouldn't have been done if it hadn't been for the storm. Yeah, we didn't at any point have to prove that we backfilled them. One thing I will mention, which I forgot, and I'm sure Alison's thinking, oh, we should have mentioned that. In the initial month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks after the storm, we basically dropped everything in council, and almost everyone in council was involved in the recovery process, manning the shower and power sites, the recovery centres. And because we didn't get any approval for any of those roles prior to them happening, because it's an emergency, you're not going to, we didn't get any of that money. And we estimate that it probably cost council about $300,000 for those people to be involved, because it was all hands on deck. People were, shower and power sites were open 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for a good month, 6 weeks. You can imagine the staffing that's required for that. And we didn't know that we needed to get approval for those before it happened, because, it was an emergency. We were just busy doing what needed to be done. And sure, in the first week or 2, maybe, that was just never going to happen, but we could have maybe got half of it if we'd known, and maybe a couple of weeks in, if my role had not come in completely green in July last year, might have known, let's get some position descriptions in place, let's get them approved, let's at least claim part of that. That's just something we learned.
Sorry,
later.
Just quickly, when you're talking, sorry, my question probably didn't come across terribly well. So I've raised that question before. Just with the ones that you said that some of those positions were filled internally. So you might have had existing works crews that have now become disaster staff. It was more around the backfilling of those normal duties in order for them to be eligible for the funding. So we're going to have programs we're not going to be able to deliver because we're too busy. We can divert those staff with those new disaster PDs, but do we need to backfill them to be eligible?
No.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Deanne. Good one. And then there's a context question from Nick there, and I'm not expecting either maybe Alison or Penny will have this off the top of your head, or you might research it. But how many staff does Yarra Ranges have in total? I.e., is 35 staff just a drop in the bucket, or is it a fair whack on top of the broader Yarra Ranges staffing profile?
I think we've got about 900.
Yeah, about 890 we have across council. So 35 obviously isn't a huge amount. So that's what, just under 4%. But yeah.
And we didn't none of these people were actually on the ground removing trees. We had contractors all doing that, and we were just coordinating it. So our boots on the ground were not council staff, which is why this is only 35 and not a bigger number.
Yes, that's exactly right. If you're managing crews, it'd be different again, or running a Rochester centre, like there'd be other things that'd be going on as well.
Yes.
Thank you. We've got a couple of other general questions, but Penny, do you want to keep going and then we'll come back to those, or would you like to jump into those general questions kind of now?
No, let's do them now.
Yeah, great. So back to the idea for photos. Claire Barnes just asked a question there. Were they strict, or did they enforce the requirement for location metadata within those photos? There's a bit of talk about this in our region.
Oh boy, did they ever. Yes.
So can I ask the follow-up for that? So again, I'll let you talk about what geodata is in a sec, but we've got our Connect system that has the photos and pops it in a geospatial system, and that tells us where that photo was taken. Would that be good enough, or does it need to be embedded in the photo in a fancy
No, that's
way?
ideal. That's ideal. And we have got some of our contractors now who have systems like that, which allow us to do it. It was quite some months down the track when we discovered that that was a requirement. And they did let us go back and just annotate the photo with the latitude and longitude. But ideally, and we do have some contractors now, as I said, who've got those systems, ideally it would be metadata with the photo. But yeah, because I think it was December by the time we discovered that that was a requirement. So they had to sort of be a bit flexible with us. But yeah, it's a nightmare. Sorry.
No, you're all right. So for Claire and everybody else, I think the answer to that one is yes, if you're following the chat broadly, and then there'll be details underneath that. I did see some other parts about a whole lot of annotations on photos, etc.
Yeah, I'm going to give you some examples of those shortly. Yes.
Sure. I'll stop there then. Last one then for now, Penny. You mentioned at the beginning trees aren't eligible assets. Did you mean the replacement cost, but tree cleanup costs would be okay?
Tree replacement is definitely not eligible. What I mean with trees not being an eligible asset is just the removal of a tree generally is not a cost that's eligible unless it's affecting an eligible public asset, an essential public asset, which is a road or a footpath or a bridge. And yeah, no replacement costs for trees. That's definitely not.
Yeah. So I think the way I'm reading it then, and I'm just restating what you're saying, is it's the nexus or the link to the essential public asset that matters. And if that's VicRoads' essential public asset, it may not be your client. There's a little bit of detail into that as well, possibly.
Yes. Yeah. We had to check every single road that we cleaned up after the fact, obviously. And if it's a VicRoads road, we couldn't claim it. We spent about $500,000 on VicRoads roads. And, we basically had conversations with them, and we think they spent about the same amount, maybe more. So we just decided to wear that because it's a absolute no. If it's not a council-owned road, it's an absolute no for eligibility.
Thanks, Penny. Might let you keep going for now and come back if we find more questions.
Yep. So now I'd just like to talk about some things that worked for us. One of the first conversations we had with EMV was with someone who said, the highlighter is your friend. And we basically went, no, we're not going to manually annotate our invoices and photos. That's ridiculous. So Acrobat is absolutely a requirement. You must have it. You will need it. You will become very, very expert in it. The clearer you can make the annotation, the easier it'll be for the assessor, and the more likely you are to get a better outcome in terms of the assessment. I'm just going to open an annotated invoice, one of my favourites, because it's 9 pages, and I think I just might. Oh, there we go. Is that the one? Yes, this is the 9-page invoice. So this is an invoice.
We can't see it, Penny. You might need to,
might have to
drag it onto a screen.
What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Where's the...
What we might do, oh, there it goes. Yeah, okay.
Got it? Yeah.
Yep.
So this was an invoice, and one of the fun things we had was that the storm was in June, and financial year claims have to be done separately. So we had, for example, Ace Trees, who did a lot of work for us, provided us with invoice. Some of the work was done in June, some of the work was done in July. So we had to split those claims up. And then we get the fun that some of the work was done on essential public assets and some of the work wasn't eligible. And then also together on the same invoice, some of the work was category A claims because it was on residential property, and some of the work was next to essential public assets. So as you can see, we've gone through and said, so this was obviously a July claim that this invoice was prepared for. We've crossed out works that we're not claiming on this claim. We've said that's June works. It's not on this claim. It's a 9-page invoice, so there's quite a bit there. Why aren't you going? That's why you're not going. Again, June works claimed separately, and then highlighting the items we are actually claiming. So this particular contractor was excellent with their invoicing. As you can see, it might be 9 pages, but everything is clearly stated. The AGRN is, I think it's on the front page. It's got a request number, so we can look up the customer request. It's got the address. It's got what date the work was done, because that was important for us because of the financial year, and what they actually did, removed the failed tree. And so we would then include a copy of the customer request, which would have said the tree is going to fall over the road. It needs to be removed, or maybe it was on the road, and how much they charged us for it. So it makes it nice and easy to claim, and it's easy for the assessor to see on that invoice, right, this is the item that's being claimed, not all the ones that are crossed out. This is obviously a category A claim. So there's work, and category A and category B are claimed separately. Such fun. So this invoice was prepared for category A. So we've crossed out where it's category B, it's claimed separately, and then highlighted again the items that we are claiming. We just make it as easy as possible for the assessor to see what we're doing. And this invoice would have been claimed category A for last financial year, category A for this financial year, category B for last and this financial year. And I think that's all. So it's gone through the ringer a few times. And you can see we've crossed out things where it's not claimable and why. You know, not claimable, the tree is owned by council, the asset is a Vic Roads road, and the tree was already dead and leaning before the storm. So we haven't tried to claim that. And that just gives the assessor a level of comfort that we know what we're doing. They don't have to come back to us and say, well, why didn't you claim that one? It's all clearly there. They don't need to ask about it. They just go, no, don't need to worry about that one.
Gee, that's a lot of detail per invoice though, Penny, but that's just how you found it best worked.
You don't, there's no other way.
Yeah.
I wish there was another way.
Yeah.
I mean, we had 1,000 invoices, not all of them are this long. but yeah, it was about 1,000 invoices that had to be claimed. And yeah, this level of detail is required, unfortunately, as I'm sure a lot of people on this chat or on this webinar already know that. And if you don't, good luck. And yes, this is what it's about. I actually had someone working for me who was excellent with this. Obviously, it's time consuming, it's painstaking. You need to have incredible attention to detail. And we finished the claims in July this year. So it took us, well, 13 months from the storm. She started in September and we started claiming almost immediately.
Yep.
And she was full time doing this.
Yep.
There was nothing else she needed to do. This was her job and she did a great job. We're very lucky. Yeah, so that's the rest. And then down the bottom, if I get rid of that, you can see we've given the assessor a total to say this is how much we've claimed of all the items we've highlighted. And then one of the things in my notes is we've done a reconciliation of the invoice, which makes it's just a proof to prove that what we've claimed is accurate. It helps the assessor because otherwise they'd have to go through and do this. So we've said, what's category A, what's category B? The invoice doesn't always split out GST. So we've done that in here. We've done the date of the work, the request number, why something hasn't been claimed on these claims because it's June, so it's in a separate claim. Yeah, so it just makes it as easy as possible for the assessor, and it's also a check for us to make sure, as this invoice was $61,000, we want to claim every single dollar if we possibly can.
Yeah.
So this just proves to us, yes, we've done all the claims we needed to, it adds up, that's it, move on to the next one.
Thank you, Penny. That's great. Good to see that level of detail, and a few more Adobe licenses that might be on the way through now after hearing some of that. Are we back? Yeah. Are there further slides and things you wanted to go through, Penny, after that?
There are, and yep. I'm probably going to have to
keeping an eye on the time. We might wind up in we'll try and keep a couple of minutes at the end for any further questions that might have come up.
Whoops. Just trying to work out how to. There we go. I just need to go back to sharing that. There we go. So can you see the presentation again?
Yep, here we go. Yep. It just takes a second. We've got it again. Go for it.
Yep. So the second item on there is just the spreadsheet reconciling the invoice, which I've just shown you. We kept a spreadsheets everywhere, unfortunately, of claims submitted. The DRFA system gives random codes to claims, which is completely and utterly useless, really. So we started our own system of numbering when we started, as I said, very imaginatively at 1 and went on from there. And we just had a spreadsheet that said claim number 1 is $445,000 and this is the DRFA code. And the assessor would usually say, oh, I'm assessing claim number 1 because it was easier for them as well. So that was one of the things we did to make life easier for us. Regular claims were encouraged, even though it took them in some instances 6 months to make the assessment. They were very keen on us putting in regular claims, and we basically did one every week or so. Sometimes it was 2 weeks, no more than $500,000 preferably. And it just gives them a level of comfort that you're keeping on top of things. One of the things the assessor said is please put Cat A and Cat B separate because into separate claims because it's easier, because it's a completely different assessment process. So it just makes it easier for the assessor. And one of the things we did, which the assessor just loved, is that we kept a reconciliation of all the costs associated with the event, including those that are not being claimed. Because he said, you know, so many councils are not keeping on tap of what they've claimed, and so they'll claim things twice. And that's just annoying for the assessor that they it might be 3/4 of the way through the assessment before they realise that. But we kept a full reconciliation, and I'm just going to bring that up, which obviously is going to ruin my sharing again, but I will just show you. Yes, it's my file. You can open it. Yes, that one. Fine.
Yep, that's switched over, Penny. Thanks. This looks like a proper spreadsheet.
It's a proper spreadsheet, all right. Yes, okay. What are you doing? Where are we? That's not it. That's not it. Why isn't it open?
That's all right. For the sake of
There we
time,
go.
Penny, we might keep just
Sorry.
a quick view on that one.
Can you see this claim status spreadsheet?
Yes.
Yes. So this is the reconciliation, the total cost incurred, and this doesn't include salaries because that was separate. And then all of the categories of what we didn't claim, what's work in parks, reserves, bushland, work on Vic roads. Contractors included BAU works on their invoices which couldn't be claimed. So you can see all of that, that reconciliation. So we knew, and this is a list of every single invoice. And so then we've split it up. What have we claimed? What have we not claimed because it's ineligible? Any notes that we had, yeah, it just all goes on and on and on and on, and it's a full-time job pretty much even keeping this up to date. But it just allowed us to keep track of everything that was going on, and the assessor loved that we were keeping track of it because it meant he didn't need to.
Thank you, Penny. We'll probably start moving towards final questions if people have got them, but anything else, or I just want to make sure we haven't cut you off though. There are other slides.
No, I'm just checking. That's it.
Hey, I thought I picked it about right. I'm just going to quickly run through the questions, and then I might go to final comments from Alison or Penny online if there's any other things you think we might want to cover. But one question there talks about the pleasure of doing insurance recovery claims, or just these ones. But I might broaden that to say, did you group up and do your building insurance, etc., through the same, or was that sort of separate to where you were?
That was separate. We passed those costs over to the risk team, and they took care of those claims.
Great. There's one from Melissa O'Keefe here. I don't quite get it, but are you able to collect any extra funding through the VGC return based on your council contribution stated in the letter from EMV? Yes.
That was one of the things that came up very early because they deduct $35,000 from your first claim. And you can then claim it in your annual return, which is obviously a long time afterwards. So yes, we have done that. Yes.
Amazing. Thank you. That's a good one. New for me. Was it critical to include your customer request number on the invoices?
Not essential, but as I said, we used it for evidence to go back to the customer request. If we didn't have a picture of the damage, the customer request saying, oh, the tree's over my driveway or the tree's leaning on the road was taken as enough evidence. So it just helps you if you've got that.
Great. And I'm sorry, I misspoke for Sarah Butler there earlier. Apparently the question was, have you had the pleasure of doing immediate restoration claims or solely EW?
We did do an immediate reconstruction in the first weeks after the storm. And that was, yeah, it's backwards because you get the approval before you do the work, but it's pretty much all the same amount of work. It's just you do it before the work is done. And we're currently in the process of doing asset reconstruction on some of our roads as well, which again is pre-approved. And I mean that we're 15 months after the storm and we're still doing those asset reconstructions. So, yeah.
Yeah. Good one. Oh, late breaking, just made it in before my cutoff. So I'm just going to read this out. On the same token, is it also critical to use the AGRN reference on the invoices? We have been notified the number by our assessor, and the answer to that, I'm pretty sure, is yes. But
yes.
It's probably worth reiterating that that's that. I've only got
you can
one.
put it on with later, but we told our contractors as well, so they just started putting it on. It just makes it a bit easier if you don't have to add it on later.
I'm conscious we've only got a few minutes, but I did think it'd be worth either yourself or Alison speaking to just, you mentioned EMV and assessor, and I don't think everybody's going to get the roles there. Do you mind just speaking on that briefly, because they can be quite different people and different areas to deal with, if that's okay?
I can probably speak to that one. So EMV, Emergency Management Victoria, they are the state government agency that administers the DRFA, and particularly in relation to Cat A and Cat B. The assessor who works with EMV is actually works for the Department of Transport. So they are with separate agencies, but they work together. One thing that's probably Penny's iterated is the relationship with the assessor and with EMV was very critical, particularly when we were negotiating with them on some of those more grayer areas. So we actually had fortnightly meetings, and we've only just gone to monthly in the last month. So it was very good to answer some of those quick questions, and we knew we had it in the diary. So yeah, you are actually dealing with multiple agencies. And then when you think about Cat C and Cat D, that actually was not through EMV, that was through what was known as BRV, now recently renamed ERV. So they're now called Emergency Recovery Victoria. So any claims under Cat C and D had to go through them, whereas the Cat A and B went through EMV, being Emergency Management Victoria.
Thank you so much for that additional bit. I'm going to wind this up shortly because I'm all about getting people off to lunch on time. And if you're watching this on record later, well done on making it through to minute 58. Any final comments though, Alison or Penny, of course. Happy to do that. I'll just do a very quick wrap up though, otherwise, unless there's something else that was burning for you guys.
There were a couple of questions that were submitted prior to the webinar.
Yep.
So I think we've covered most of them. And certainly if there's anyone there who we feel we haven't, one I did note that came from Jackie Thomas at Corangamite was about the different funding streams. So as Penny has said, we only mainly got Category A, Category B, and what was the Council Support Fund, which basically was almost $5.8 million over 2 years. But we burnt a lot of time and effort of councillors, the CEO, our advocacy people in working with the state. It is challenging to deal with various state government agencies. We went into this thinking we were going to get all this extra support, and we had to fight very hard for what we got. So there are other opportunities, but it's very hard to find them, and the state are very tightly controlled. So I just wanted to sort of acknowledge that. But I think most of the other questions prior to this webinar, there was one question about who would be the lead. We're still working out who that is. From an emergency management space, it is our EM team that run that, and finance is part of that support process. So I suppose finance is very there from a process purchasing background, but yeah, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Nathan.
Perfect. Thank you. I just want to say thanks again. Can we have a virtual round of applause? Don't worry, we can't hear you, but for Alison and particularly Penny, who's done most of the speaking today, it's a hugely important topic. My last reflection really briefly is that because one of the questions was what's the practical advice, what's it's got to do with finance, not quite like that, but finance needs to be at the table and needs to be there early to save work later is what I'd say if I picked up anything from what Penny sort of got on there. So if you don't know what that is or that's still got to happen for you, then have a think about raising that up to your director or your finance people to make sure you're getting in. And it's probably a longer process that's happening already, but if they're saying, don't worry, we've got it sorted, you can just fix up the claim later, that make sure you're getting into that meeting or to that table to sort of be a part of that conversation to save a lot of paperwork possibly later if the right job codes, etc. aren't set up. we'll call time there. If there's further questions, send them through to Gab, myself, Alison or Penny, and we'll try and circulate that. Otherwise, the copy of this preso will be up with this recording in later. And at 12:01, I've failed slightly as a chair, but I wish you all the best. And again, particularly for those through Campaspe and other areas, Loddon, others that are particularly hit. And I know there's many others I haven't mentioned, storms, etc. going on. Just sing out if there's something the local or regional council groups can do to help. Don't be shy. That's part of what FinPro is about. And if those are at the conference, hopefully you picked up a little bit more of that vibe. It's a support network as well as this sort of PD and grouping up of information and passing it on. Thanks so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you next time on the next webinar. Cheers.